Hello.
I think it should be on you, Deanna, but if you want me to introduce it.
Hang on a sec. Hello. So that was Simon Candy, who's joining us from acousticguitarlessonsonline.com. Thank you very much for coming. Please post in the chat where you're joining us from. So today I'm really excited about what we have because we've got two great guests. We've got Simon, who is expert acoustic guitar coach and instructor. And we've got Jeff, who has many, many years experience writing and releasing music and coaching in creativity and songwriting. And Jeff puts a special emphasis on allowing his students to be and helping them be creatively active and expressive and writing music, even if they're at an early stage in their playing. So something that's important to Jeff is emphasizing that people can be creative early on and technique is no barrier. And I really think this is important because it's easy to get into a thing where you think that you have to get to a certain level before you're allowed to start, before your ideas have any value, and that's nonsense. So what we're going to talk about today is how we can write expressive songs. So how you can, whatever your level, how you can think about different elements of music to make your songs expressive. And so you might think that that's quite an abstract idea, that how does one measure whether something's expressive or not? But in fact, there's some very reliable ways to make your music sound really expressive, and we're going to look at some of those today. So I'm going to just bring on my guests, Simon and Jeff. There we go. Here we all are. So I'm going to just kick off with our first key. Well, five keys we're going to look at of how to write songs that are expressive and how to create music that's expressive. And one of the kind of hook that we're going to use is tension and release. So if you've never really heard of the expression of tension and release before, don't worry, it's going to become very apparent to you when we start going through the examples. It might be something you use even though you haven't necessarily labeled it as such. I released a bunch of albums without really having ever thought of that phrase to myself, but you'll recognize it when we start going into it. So we're going to look at some simple ways that we can work with tension and release that musicians and songwriters of all levels can put into practice. And you'll see that if you are experienced, we can take these to quite an advanced levels. So firstly, I'm going to ask Jeff and Simon, imagine that we're writing a song and we're on one chord. So we're going to stay on one chord for a little bit. How can we be expressive without changing chords? So what are some of the ways that we can be expressive and create tension relief, even if we're staying on the same chord? So I think, Simon, would you have any suggestions on that?
Sure. So I like to think of different levels of tension. So if we were on let's say we're on an E chord, E major chord. So we have what I would call kind of perhaps a level 1 tension, which would be playing chord tones. So if I can, I'll use an E chord because I don't really have any backing here. So I can imply the chord with a low droning E. And if I play chord tones, notes that are in the E chord, that's a level 1 tension. It's almost not a tension at all. But we'll just call it level 1, right? It's as kind of in and as consonant as you can be. And if you want to get really, if you really want to dissect that, you could also rank the, level of tension or consonance or whatever each of those notes have against the chord. We won't go that deep, but certainly chord tones would be like a level sort of 1 tension, if you like. It's very it's safe, if you want to use that term. The next sort of level of tension I'd be thinking when the chord is static, so we've sort of got to do the work here if the chord's just going to remain constant, would be to use other notes in the key that aren't in the chord. So an F sharp note, the 2 of the E scale, key of E, or we could use the 4 or the 11 if you want to call it that, or the 6 or the 7th. Quite a bit of tension in that 7th. Your ear wants to hear it resolve to the root. So there's an example of tension and release right there. Or the 4 is probably, that's the note that you really probably don't want to stay on for too long. You want to resolve that either up or down into chord tones. So it's another diatonic tone, diatonic meaning it's from the key of E, but it's not in the E chord. So it's going to give you a little bit more tension, which you can resolve into a chord tone. And you've got the 9. Some of these are really beautiful extensions to an E chord. They all are, really. So that'd be like a level 2 tension, and that's all within the key. If you want to get kind of a level 3 tension, then you would go outside of the key. There's really, all notes can work as long as you resolve them. So if I, just randomly play a note, it's probably, now that we're sort of hearing this tonality of E, and I play a note outside of the key, it's going to sound a little off, probably, to your ear. We need to sort of hear it a little bit more in context. But we can make these notes work. If I come back to these chord tones and I fill in every note between them, all those notes work because I'm resolving them to chord tones. So it doesn't matter which note I play as long as it's resolving. And there's lots of ways that you can get this sort of level 3 tension across a chord. And granted, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So some people might not like to hear that amount of tension. That's fine. It's all there to use. I don't think of it as right notes and wrong notes. I think of it as tension and release and different levels of that tension and then releasing that tension. So, even just following a pattern and resolving it into a chord tone, our ear hooks into that pattern and there's a rhythm about it. And it works, even though some of those notes are out of key. So anything can work, really, following a pattern and resolving to a chord tone or a note, at least in the key. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I think about, creating some tension using melody or single notes over a static chord. And I think Deanna's trying to find perhaps the camera angle here. So I can keep going if you like, Deanna, while you try and find that angle.
Oh, there we are. Right. Apologies for that. Restream's just changed how it does the interface. So yeah, just one thing I wanted to comment there for anyone who's wondering about chord tones and what we're suggesting is that our music sounds more expressive when there's a lot of tension and release in it. And I thought it might be worth just going into that a little bit more. In a way, we perceive contrast and the building of tension and then the releasing of tension, we register that as being expressive. So in the in Aretha Franklin in Chain of Fools, she really emphasizes the two in the scale. So there's not a whole lot of tension. If we're like if you're all at home and I play a chord and I ask you to sing a note in the chord, you're probably going to pick la la la. Like most of the time when I do this, somebody's going to pick one of those notes that are in the chord. So it's going to match perfectly. So if it's a note that's not in the chord, it's going to stick out more. It's going to feel more tense. So in Chain of Fools, she's got for 5 long years I thought you were my man, but I found out, and there's a second. It's like, and it's a higher note, and so that really brings a lot of tension. I found out I'm just a link in your chain. You got me where you want me, and then we hear it again. So that's, I think, a really nice example of a kind of non-chord tone bringing a bit of tension. And because it's the highest note as well, it's using tension is coming from the fact that it's the highest note we're hearing, and from the fact that it's not a chord tone. But of course, it's coming back down afterwards, so it's being resolved. But that's like part of what gives it that expressiveness and that momentum, even though we're just staying on that same chord. Obviously, she is Aretha, and there's another kind of element to the expressiveness of that, which is her actual vocal tone and vocal quality, but which we don't necessarily have access to. But we can all sing a second. And then just in that same kind of blues area, Smokestack Lightning, Howling Wolf, he's using a lot of the flat 7. I might just play you a very quick example, a quick clip of that. 1 second. Wrong. Here we go. Okay, it doesn't want to play. Too bad. So those are a couple of examples of how we can use melody notes to drive a bit of tension and release. Jeff, have you got anything that you would like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, and let me grab my acoustic. You guys got the acoustic, so I want to fit in. You know, one thing, especially for more beginners, is just the dynamics. So you could use a lot of dynamics through the articulation of the right hand and kind of make one chord sound pretty cool, right? So if we kind of start mid, build that up. Bring it down. They're kind of like, what's going on? What's going to happen? I don't know. Bam! You know, so an easy way that you can be expressive without having to learn a lot other than how to control the levels of your right hand dynamics. And that can add you could have fun for hours doing that, you know? And it's a simple way to add some tension to your music.
That is definitely true. And if you grew up in the 90s, you'll recognize that was a kind of bit of a staple of bands, you know, the bands that certainly I listened to then. However, I'm sure you guys, you know, grew up in the noughties or the teens. Okay, so this is cool. So we've got some ideas of how, if we're sitting on one chord, we can use melody notes or choice of melody note to kind of manage the tension. And there's also you can also, we didn't really talk about this yet, but you can change the direction of travel of the notes. The notes can go up and they can go down. So the way that the melody is moving is another way that we can create some tension. Typically notes going upwards is going to give us a sense of kind of rising tension, you know. That's going to be a sense of building excitement usually. So there's all of that too. So there will be, look, we could spend a whole hour just talking about that, about how we could use melody to create tension, but there are loads of other great ideas. So let's imagine now that we are still on one chord, but we're thinking more about rhythm. What opportunities do we have in terms of rhythm? Just thinking from a rhythm point of view to create and release tension. And I'm going to throw that one to Jeff. You got something for us on that?
Yeah, sure. One thing could be the harmonic rhythm of the chords you're playing. So, and the harmonic rhythm is the length at which you're hearing each of the chords, right? So, if we have a longer harmonic rhythm and we change that to a shorter harmonic rhythm, that can add some tension. So, from just doing a good old G, C, D.
I'm going to stop you there because we're coming to harmonic changes in a minute. Right now we're still on one chord.
Oh, we're still on
Yeah,
one
we got
chord.
something. We got something that we're still on one chord.
Oh my God.
No worries. I've got a real favorite thing on this, so I'm gonna
Okay.
share mine. So so you can have different rhythms. So you can have a polyrhythm, so a 6/4 feel. So Ella Fitzgerald arrangement of Caravan. We've got this this kind of 6 feel in one part of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's over a 4. And so she's singing light and stars above that shine so bright. The mystery of that fading light that lines upon our caravan. Then it goes to that 4/4 bit there. And if you counted through, it'd be 1, 2, and this is all on one chord. It's all on this kind of like D altered chord. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. So it's quite. You have to take it a little bit slower than I did to count it, but that builds up a lot of tension because she's singing the melody in 4, and then this is in this kind of 6, and the drum beat underneath is giving us a 4. But as you can hear, you can do it just with an acoustic guitar. So that kind of complexity, rhythmically speaking, I think is something we can use. You can have we're very used to hearing things in 4/4, but if you have a time signature that isn't 4/4, you can, or you alter it a little bit to create a different rhythmic feel over the 4/4. That creates a lot of tension. If I just do this, and then that chord's kind of tense as well. Let's get that altered. And by the time we get to the release, it's kind of like a real relief to get there. So I think that's a great example of how we can use rhythm. Simon, do you have any kind of ideas there?
Well, yes, I do. So if I'm thinking just with creating tension with rhythm, then there's the subdivision of the beat that can have a certain sort of pull and release. For example, if I am playing, let's just say I'm in E minor, and I play eighth notes, so dividing the beat into 2, and then I go into triplets and then come back to eighth notes. I'll play it in a moment, but to me it has a feeling of sort of pulling an elastic band when you are back, when you're playing the triplets, and then when you come back into the eighth notes, it's like releasing that elastic band, if you like. That's the sort of feeling I get from it. So, you know, if we've got a tempo, 3, 1, 2, 3, we might be eighth notes, triplet, back into eighth notes, try and stay in key here, triplets, back into eighth notes. So the triplets have that sort of pulling back, putting the brakes on a little bit if you like, and then you're releasing them, you know, when you go back into a triplet feel or an eighth note feel or something like that. I think time signature changes, as you mentioned, Deanna, definitely a great way to create tension. So, for example, one that comes to mind is Money by Pink Floyd. So there's chord changes here, but the emphasis here is on the time change. So you've got this riff in 7/4 time for a large part of the song. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Right? So that's 7/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you've got 4, 1, 2, 3, and 6. And back to 7/4. So you've got this 7/4 changing into 4/4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 into 6/4 for a bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. And back to this main theme of the song. And that whole song is really just a B minor blues. It's all the song is. I mean, it's much more than that because they've done a lot with it, but it is a B minor blues. But it's done quite well because of these time changes, and it creates tension rather than just the predictability of feeling 4 every bar, which we're so used to. So as soon as you change that up, it changes. One more that comes to mind in terms of time changes, which perhaps is a little more obvious for one reason, is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. So that sits on a sort of tonality of an A chord for quite a bit in 3/4 time in the verse. You've got this little line, I think it goes something like, right, that's all 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right, and that's all over the tonality of an A7 chord, and there's a bass line that's descending throughout, so sort of mimicking what the riff is doing a little bit, all in 3/4, all sitting on an A, and then that in itself builds tension, just sitting on the single chord. 3/4, 3/4, but then we go into a progression. I think it's like a B flat, C, F, back to B flat. So this is still 3/4, C, G, and then we hit 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 1. So that's the chorus. Just a typical 1, 4, 5 in G. So we've got the switch of the 3/4 into that 4/4. Definite release of tension in the chorus. You get the contrast, all that sort of stuff. Now those two examples, if I can just quickly provide one more, I think the Lucy in the Sky is a little more obvious in terms of the changes. I think they're a little bit more disguised in Money, but both perhaps, well, one where it's a little more obvious is when the value of the beat changes. So both those examples, the beats, whether you're in 7/4, 6/4, 3/4, were worth a quarter note. But in something, sticking with the Beatles here, Here Comes the Sun, we have the bridge, which changes from 6/8 into 5/8 into 4/4 into 7/8. So you've got this switch of dividing the beat into eighths, and you've got 6/8, 5/8, 7/8. But in between there, you've got a 4/4. So when you hear it, you might not kind of realize it so much until you really sort of pay attention. But I think the progression is 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Right, so we've got just a change every bar, which creates that tension. And when you see it in the context of the song, when it goes into that and then comes back out, it sort of, reinstates that to a bit more of a degree too. So time changes definitely either on a single chord or on a chord progression, I think, are great ways to create tension and interest and to express whatever you're wanting to express in your songs.
I love that example from Here Comes the Sun, partly because it's a sort of song we all know and love, but also you can really clearly hear when you concentrate on it how it tips you forward into the next bit of the song as well. So it has that like accelerating effect.
Yes.
And I also like about that because for me, I'm often playing by myself. So I'm always looking for ways, things that I can do when I'm playing that don't rely necessarily on having a band, even though I obviously love playing with other people too. And I think these ideas are all ones that we can apply playing by ourselves pretty easily. Like we can just translate these to solo playing settings instantly without really having to modify them. So sometimes it takes a little bit of getting used to if you're changing the time signatures and it's a time signature you're not very familiar with, but it's all very doable. Jeff, any thoughts on any further rhythmic ideas?
Yeah, real quick, one thing that you could do that's pretty simple is change where the accent is, and that can create some tension. So say you got 4/4, typically beat one is the accent. 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. So I switched the accent over to a not so common beat that would normally be accented, and just that switch in where the dynamics of the accent is coming, your ear gets used to one thing and then you're slapped into another direction.
Yeah, I really like that as well. And from a lyrics point of view, these are the examples that Jeff and Simon just gave are things that one could do lyrically. You could write phrases that were a certain set length of syllables or that had their accents in a certain place. You can move those to start on different beats of the bar. And it's a really, if you're going from one section to another and you've set up an expectation that you're going to start on beat 2 and then you move it to beat 1, that always creates a feeling of kind of like we're at the chorus because suddenly we've moved to the strong beat. And it's one of those things that I would think is really powerful to know about because you don't notice it until you analyze it. And all you notice of is like it feels really chorusy and great. And Californication does this, and he has his really short notes during the verse, and then the longer notes that move to 1 on the chorus. And then Ariana Grande, Dangerous Woman does this. None of the phrases in the verse start on the first beat. They all start on one of the I think it starts on the sort of second eighth note triplet, and then the chorus moves to beat 1. And it's one of you can't help yourself from feeling a certain sense of relief. So I think it's a very simple, powerful thing that's equally easy to do when you're just one person. So love those ideas. Now we're allowed chords, all the chords we want. So we can start thinking about how all of the available chords could help us create a sense of tension and release. So Jeff, I know you have lots to say on this.
Oh, hi. Yes. So was that when we were I was talking about the harmonic rhythm
Exactly.
earlier? Yeah. Yeah, I got into it a little too early. Yeah, totally. So just changing the harmonic rhythm can create some tension. So we got a longer harmonic rhythm. So here how I sped up the harmonic rhythm at the end there, and it really started giving us that sense of momentum within the chord progression. Just a simple way. I didn't have to create new chords or anything like that. We're just taking the chords that already exist and using them in a slightly different way. And now we're creating some more interest and momentum into the progression, right?
And just in case anyone hasn't heard the phrase harmonic rhythm, that just means how long we stay on one chord for. So I'm sure everyone could tell from the way that you demonstrated it, but just in case anyone hasn't heard that particular phrase, staying, if you have a section where you're on one chord, each chord lasts for say 4 bars, and then you switch it up and each chord lasts for like 1 bar, that creates a sense of increasing tension.
Right. And the cool thing is you can easily go the other way with that too. So it doesn't mean that you always have to take a longer harmonic rhythm where the chords are being heard longer and shorten it. You could go the other way. So you could have something that started out with a shorter harmonic rhythm, and you can create more tension by making them longer.
Yes, and actually sometimes if you just on one chord for a really long time, that in itself kind of creates a sort of a build-up of tension, especially depending which chord it is. If it's a dominant chord, after a while,
right,
like another 30 seconds of that, and you're going to be like, please move off that chord. Whereas
yeah, like if I had stayed on that D, right? If I there
exactly,
you go.
Exactly.
It's like, that can add an incredible amount of tension, just doing that.
And we can all stay on that's definitely an easy thing to do when we're by ourselves. Something that I really like with chords is what I call surprise tension, when something unexpected happens and that causes the tension of surprise. That's like if you've had a melody note and you were like la, la, da, 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 you set us up to expect a certain chord and we get a different chord, and that makes the melody note feel different. So for example, for that note, I could be like on that E. It's going to sound different every time I have a new chord, depending what chord it is. And all those will have different, the chord can make that note be increasingly tense or not tense, depending which chord I go to. So that's something I really enjoy and like doing a lot. Simon, do you have some thoughts on bringing tension via the chord?
Sure. Let's have a think here. So yeah, sort of along the lines of what you've been saying so far, definitely the change in harmonic rhythm. One example that just came to mind, I used to teach this song a lot back in the day, as an example of harmonic rhythm is, what's the song called? Holiday by Green Day, because it starts out with this chord progression. Right, that's so it's the intro and it's the verse, and then that exact same chord progression is then stretched out over twice the amount of time, full bar on each chord. Okay, so you're sort of starting out with it's half bar on each chord, and then it goes into a full bar on each chord, building a bit of tension and then releasing again. So it's just one that came to mind. Another one is odd lengths of chord progressions, if you like. So we're so used to hearing, 4-bar repeating chord progressions, 8-bar, 12 bars, 2-bar vamps, etc. But if we have something like a 3-bar repeating chord progression, that always has an element of surprise to it, because you're back at the start all of a sudden when you're so used to expecting to hear another bar. And an example of that would be a song by Pearl Jam called Black off the album 10. And there's two things going on here that I like and I think contribute to the building of tension that we're talking about. One is that it's a 3-bar, this is the outro to the song, it's a 3-bar chord progression. It's got an E minor, a D, a C, back to E minor. So second bar D and C. So you're not expecting that to begin there. Back at 1, the other thing that's happening here is the chord coming on the end of 4. All of them do. So it's a very heavy sort of accent on the end of 4, which has an effect as well. But the main thing there is the 3 bar, the odd number of bars in the progression. And then over the top of that, there's a little melody that happens, just repeats pretty much. I think that's it. And the thing that happens here is, this is kind of chord and melody working here, but I'll take it from the chord sort of perspective, is we can create tension over the chord progression by repeating something, but it's going to sound different over the E minor versus the D versus the C. Right, so that melody there is changing because of the chords behind it moving. So it's changing the relationship of the notes to the chord, and it gives the illusion that the melody is changing, but if it's not, it's the chords behind it. And another example of that would be pretty much any U2 song. I feel with the Edge playing his lines with all the delay, often he will play stuff that just repeats over and over while there's a moving chord progression behind it. So something like With or Without You is a typical 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression, and on top there's I think it's just that, and those chords are moving behind this, so the chords will make that feel like it's changing. And then he goes into, and he's got all the delay on there, but it's just repeating over the chord progression. So it's this thing of the melody just repeating, looping around, and the chords behind it are changing. So there's some thoughts in terms of how to create interest, expression, tension with chords.
Thank you. I really like the thing of using the expectations that we all have from the music that we've grown up listening to, and creating a little bit of surprise based on that. So I've got a Frank Black example, which I accidentally played earlier, but was intended for this. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1. Phrase starts again, 2, third bar. Phrase starts again, third bar. And then we've got the end, which is going to be 4 bars. And then we go back to the beginning. First, second bar, third bar. First bar, second bar, third bar, 1. So it's possible I didn't count those bars in the right order, but basically we've got 3 phrases that have 3 bars, and every time we get to the end of the line, it sort of feels like a little bit of a kind of rush into the beginning of the next line. And I think that's really cool. And so if anyone here wants an easy way to get into this, take that same format of having 3 3-bar phrases and a 4-bar phrase, and that longer phrase will feel like a bit of release, because that you can see that it feels like a little, we're kind of jolted back into the beginning of the phrase in quite a cool way. And this is another one of those ideas that you don't have to be hugely technically proficient or at an advanced skill level to be able to use. So lots of interesting possibilities there for things that we can do by ourselves with bands. Our next key of expressiveness is perhaps something where we do need perhaps other people, and it's to do with dynamic and volume. So Jeff gave us a great example yesterday, of how you can just alter the volume. And there are bands that we all know and love that use this very effectively. But I think volume is maybe not the only aspect of dynamics. would you, Jeff, have any other ideas about how we can change dynamic, perhaps in an arrangement with more musicians?
Yeah, totally. And you guys, everybody hears this all the time, but sometimes you forget about it when you're writing songs. You're thinking about your part and playing your part, and that's it. But we got to consider the other musicians that we have available to us and how they can help us affect the dynamics and stuff. So, it could be as simple. Now with recording, you can get away with a lot more. We could do as many layers of different guitars with slightly different tones on each one of those guitars. It could even be a different guitar itself playing the same part, and we can do wicked cool layering with that, adding and taking away to work on the dynamics of the song, and also completely taking them away. I mean, you hear a lot of songs where it'll come down to just a really cool bass line, and then the guitars come back in and it hits you and it's so awesome, or building up. Of course, we also have, with electric guitar, there's different things that you can do with different gain stages, effects that you might want to add as well. There's just so many possibilities, and adding instrumentation as far as maybe different keyboards or violins or orchestra type stuff. There's so many different cool things that you can do with the layering of instruments instead of having them all going full blast the whole time. Think about bringing the instrumentation in and out of the song to help create more interest.
Yeah, when I played in garage rock bands, the band was always obsessed with being intense. And I think many bands have that desire, and they equated intensity with loudness. And I think there's so many missed opportunities. Plus, my hearing is not that great now because of that. Not so intense now.
I neither.
But so I think we can. Firstly, the suggestions you've made are really effective, and we hear it in music the whole time. And even when we know we're being manipulated, it still works. So we're still like when we get the loud bit off the quiet bit. And obviously, there's certain full band effects that one can really explore. But even when you're just with one guitar, I think you can translate some of the ideas that you shared to that. So we could have something that we played as a bass line, and then we could play the chords in different part of the neck. And I'm sure that Simon might have some ideas about how dynamic could work on an acoustic guitar.
Sure. Yeah. So I think when you're on a single guitar, you've got to think of all the possibilities. I mean, a good thing to do is to create solo arrangements of songs, even not necessarily where you play the chord and the melody. You might sing the song. You don't have to do all the parts on the guitar, but just you've got to create the same kind of dynamics that you have in the bigger, when you've got the full band like Jeff was talking about. You've got to try and emulate that on a single guitar. Now, you're not going to sound like a full band ever on a single guitar, but we can create, within the context of the acoustic guitar, the same sort of, light and shade between, having more things going on or less things going on. So let's say we've just got a 1-4-5 chord progression in A. So that'll be our A. We'll go 5-4 back to A. So there's lots of ways we could do that. If we wanted to be very, very minimal, we could simply play the root note and maybe a chord tone from the chord. So instead of this big A sound that's, quite dense, we can just play the root note, implying the chord, the A, and the A note, or we could play any chord tone from the chord. And if we're going to the E, we could play the E and any chord tone there. We can play them separately or together. We just want a very thin sound that has a lot of room to move. in terms of building the intensity, building density into your playing. Going to our D, we could just play the low D and the any chord tones from the chord back to the A. We're an A, aren't we? Or we could play fill the sound a little bit more with triads. So again, just a little level up, but not quite at the full open chord stage, where you've got triad shapes, and being in the key of A, we can drone lower strings and higher strings to bring in a bit of a bigger sound with that. Going to E, to our D. And with the triads, you've got lots of possibilities in terms of how you want to voice the chords, so you can get a lot of contrast and variation there. And in the key of A, it also works nicely where you can add some harmonics, just some natural harmonics here, which, depending where you are and the chord you're playing, but can add another element of sound to what you're doing. And then of course you can go into the open chords, and you can go into the bar chords, and you can build sound, and you can add bass lines, all sorts of things. A great thing to do is just to create an acoustic arrangement of a song on a single guitar and see what you can do to build the dynamics. And I sort of think of just the three basic layers. You've got the bass, you've got the chords, and you've got melody. And each of those have their own little levels within themselves to build, but you can also work them against each other to build an arrangement, and you can have it come up and come down and come back up and all sorts of things. But you're thinking like a full band, but you're arranging it for the acoustic guitar or just a single guitar.
Yes, love that. I think also when it comes to that, although I sort of have labeled this key to expressiveness, dynamic and volume, I think it pulls in some of the others, because one of the ways that you can increase feeling of dynamic is by changing what's happening rhythmically. So if you've got a bass note, maybe you're singing across the bass note and the dynamic's quite low, one way to sort of, as soon as you change the rhythmic intensity, that's going to change the dynamic as well. And then adding more notes. That will all change the dynamic too. And I suppose I've been changing the dynamic in that phrase as in making it higher, but of course it can go in the other direction as well. The number of notes you use, whether the notes are sort of the same. So having a lot of kind of unison notes is going to sound different than having full notes in the chords. Having a pedal tone, that's something I really like to do. As a way to build a little bit of tension and move and get that rising note sound out of the guitar. So I think all of those things can work really well on acoustic guitar, and there's obviously lots of very easy ways you can exploit it in a band setting. So this question kind of follows on a little bit from the last one, or this theme. So the last key of expressiveness, we've kind of mainly been talking a lot about musical choices. So what melody notes that we can have over a chord, which chords you might have, how often we're going to change chords. But what about the way we're approaching the guitar? We've had a few suggestions, but if we've got a phrase that we're playing on guitar, or a set of chords that we're playing on guitar, aside from the choice of notes and how they relate to the chord, or aside from how loud or soft, are there other things that we can do physically that are going to influence the level of tension? So I'm going to throw this one to Jeff first, because I reckon you're going to have lots of cool suggestions. Unmute yourself, Jeff.
Sorry, this goes along a little bit with what we were talking about already, but a simple thing is adding palm muting to the chords. Now I know that this affects the the volume of it, right? But it does affect the dynamics as well. And you can even do that on an acoustic guitar, so if we're just jamming on a A and a G. found them also hitting some accents by adding the open strings in there and the different pitch ranges. Just on even an open chord or a bar chord, you can manipulate the pitch ranges on that just by where you're picking or strumming, you know. You know, that automatically adds some cool dynamics very easily to what you're playing there with the chords.
That's yeah, palm muting is great. I think there's also quite a lot of things we can do with our pick or our fingers. We can. So there's how physically we're being with things, and I'm not like a massive. You're going to be far more of like a rock supremo than me, but there's maybe a tremolo on
tremolo,
lovely down on acoustic guitar there. You're kind of like, and then of course, you know, some of these are going to be techniques that are going to require a little bit more development for people who want to do that. But even for less experience, you know, the breaks are not hard to do. So
yeah.
there's going to be, you know,
say that.
Yeah, if we're talking about playing single notes, there's going to be all those kinds of techniques for bending, double stop.
Speaking of the 90s. You know, those rakes really make it, you know.
All the little
very cool doing those rakes in there, you know.
Exactly. So I think there are, if we really think about how physically am I kind of approaching the instrument, there are also lots of other things that reveal themselves. Simon, do you have like a few ideas for that on acoustic guitar?
Well, I thought you sort of mentioned this one just briefly. I don't know if it's going to fit in this category, but I think the pedal tone is a great one. That didn't come to mind when I was thinking of things to offer here, but I think, you know, a pedal tone is a great way to build tension, and you often hear it. I'm probably not going to be able to demonstrate this here because I can't think of tunes off the top of my head, but I can hear you know, some jazz tunes where the double bass will pedal a tone for sometimes like a complete sort of chorus, and then it'll break into a walking bass or something like that, and there's a great sense of release there. You know, you could use little triads, and I'm just pedaling the A note in the bass across the E here, the D back to the A, and then that's the same chord progression, but now I'm playing root position chords, but back to the pedal. So I think, yeah, the pedal tone in the bass can be used probably, I mean, pedal tones anywhere on the top are really great for building tension. And another one with just chords, and this isn't so much a physical thing, but it came to mind just in terms of adding tension. It's kind of like when I was speaking about the single notes before and playing outside of the key, the concept of borrowing chords can bring much tension to a chord progression. So, you know, I could have a chord progression in the key of C, and I could borrow a chord from C minor. So the basic rule there, if you like, is that you can borrow a chord from a parallel key. So if I'm in the key C major, a parallel key would be C minor, because both keys have C as the root, and they will share common notes. This is why it kind of works. So we could be in C, and you can really hear that chord pop out. There's a number of chords that you can bring in to play. A good example of a chord progression that uses borrowed chords, just to kind of illustrate this a bit better, is a song by Soundgarden called Black Hole Sun. So it's in the key of G, which is fine, but it's going to use a lot of borrowed chords. So it's going to go from G to B flat, which is a borrowed chord, to F, borrowed chord, E minor is in the key, E flat is borrowed, D is in the key, G, F borrowed, A flat borrowed. So you got G, B flat borrowed from G minor, F borrowed from G minor, E minor is diatonic, E flat is borrowed, D, and then we've got the G, F. So you're never going to get that kind of tension if you just stay diatonic to the key of G. And it presents all sorts of very cool voice leading opportunities and things like that. So not so much a physical thing there, but certainly a concept that can bring a whole lot of interest to your chord progressions. And that was something I would see for years and years in chord progressions, and never really had the concept of borrowed chords explained to me for a long time. I just sort of recognized that there was always seemed to be a B flat chord when we're in the key of C, particularly with like rock music and things like that. But that is because B flat can be borrowed from C minor and so forth. So there are a couple of ideas just sort of more around the chord area, if you like, to bring tension into your playing.
Thank you. So this leads me nicely to my final bonus question, which is, in your own playing, composition, writing, arranging, are there any things that stand out to you in terms of your work that are your favoured methods or things that you instinctively or deliberately go back to? And the reason it's interesting that you talk about borrowed chords, Simon, is that was a thing I massively did. So one of the reasons I'm so keen on thinking about all of the ways that we might have at our disposal to create interest in a composition is that for many years when I was starting out, I would always use the chords to drive the interest. And I loved the sound of borrowed chords, and perhaps it's because of the bands I listened to before I started writing music, but that kind of type of sound was always really appealed to me, and there's lots of those kinds of movements in my material. So are there things that you tend to go to that you really love when it comes to writing or arrangement? And I'm gonna throw that question first to Jeff.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, we talked about a lot of those right now today here, and yesterday too. Yeah, so I mean, I love using palm muting because I play a lot of electric guitar, so that's quite a big effect that I'm going to use a lot. And I like going back and forth between palm muting and open playing, if you will, quite a bit, just even within the same measure of music. So it's not always either palm muted or not palm muted. We're kind of mixing and blending the two together. You might hear outside of, rock and metal, you probably hear that in blues quite a bit. So that's a big thing. I also like to use silence, right? Which I don't think we did talk about that a lot today, but that's a very key device, if you will, that I like to fall on. And it's also a cool tool to use for transitioning if you're ever having a problem transitioning from one part of your song into another part of your song. Sometimes just a beat or two or even a half a beat of a dead silent rest will allow you to make a clean transition, but it's also effective dynamically speaking as well.
Yes, silence is very underrated. Simon, what about you? Any favorite things that you find yourself returning to, or that have been a real hallmark of your writing and arranging?
Sure. So, I mean, I play a lot of acoustic guitar, not that these things are limited to the acoustic or exclusive to the acoustic, but I often find myself needing to compensate perhaps for things like distortion and sustain and things like this if I'm creating something for the acoustic guitar that is originally in an electric guitar sort of format. As well as I tend to play a lot solos, so I'll also try and incorporate other parts into my playing. So there's a lot of that going around. I'm listening to the bass to try and bring in elements of a bass part to what I might be doing in a certain song or an arrangement. Open strings sort of give me that sustained sound. So I might have some little scale run that is using open strings mixed in with fretted notes. So basically the general concept is not necessarily any note, but notes that exist in a phrase that could be played with an equivalent open string. I'll replace it with an open string, and you get that sort of mix of open strings with fretted notes in a sort of, in a way that is not typical of where you might be playing in the open position, where those strings are anyway available to use and typically used. And then I will use a lot of harmonics for a different sound as well. That's harp harmonics, and that just increases the range of the instrument greatly. I mean, you can get almost the range of a piano using harp harmonics, because you get the octave harmonic of any note you play on the guitar, even if you are, where is it here? There it is. So even off of the fretboard, I can get harmonics of notes up at the 12th fret. So I'm sort of got additional frets, if you like. I've just got to estimate where the fret is to get that. So I do use I try and expand the scope of the sound of my pitch range and exaggerate the dynamics to compensate for not having other instruments behind me, if that's the case, and or compensating for creating something on the acoustic guitar that's been played on an electric. So, the sustain and things like that with open strings. So there'd be a couple of things I think I tend to go to quite a bit to get that sort of sound.
It's like wild to me when I hear you do the harp harmonics and the open string cascading lines. It sort of sounds like a waterfall. So it sounds to me like in a way you almost thinking about the guitar as your orchestra, and you've got these different elements you can get to it. Wow. Yeah. Well, that was very cool. Thank you very much. And I know that Simon actually has something for people to download. Tell us about this, Simon.
Sure. So this is a workshop that I did recently and have made into a little video. It's primarily a video here of about 40 minutes perhaps in length, and it's all about how to back a singer on a single guitar. So kind of along the lines of what I was just tapping into there. And this would work for whether you're going to be playing with a singer and you're the only guitarist. I've done plenty of gigs like that before, so you've got to compensate for things there. Or if you're a singer guitar player and you want to do some things that are sort of outside of just the standard open chords, bar chords, all that stuff's great, but it's even better when it's in the mix with other things to provide light and shade. So in this workshop, I take a single tune at St. James Infirmary, and Deanna, as you well know, you are featured in this workshop because no one wants to hear me sing, believe me, including myself, but I cannot sing. So Deanna was kind enough to be part of this workshop so that everything I presented we could test and demonstrate. So it's not theoretical stuff that may or may not work. Just go try it. You'll hear it being applied in the workshop, thanks to Deanna. And there's some examples where I also do some instrumental stuff with the tune, because it's also about a complete arrangement. So what do you do when there's no singing? And there's some options that I explore there. So it's a video for download, instant download. There's an ebook there that is a bit of a companion to the workshop where you can go in and do the activities that I present in the workshop yourself. So that is available on the web address there, or the QR code that you could scan there, I believe, will take you to the web page. It's free. Just chuck in your details and you'll have access to it immediately. So if that's your sort of thing, you want to explore those things, give it a go.
So that is great. You should definitely grab that because Simon's material is always immaculate. I also have this. It's if you are interested in writing lyrics and you haven't got that much experience, or you have, but you want perhaps to get going again. This is an ebook with 5 ways to write great lyrics, and they're all things that would have made a huge difference to me when I was starting out. And they have just some principles that will really change how you think about language. If you have written songs just in an instinctive way, I think you'll find this really enriches how you go about it. It's got a bunch of activities and a writing calendar, so if you want to get a little bit more consistent with what you're doing, you can download that and it'll keep you going for weeks. And those, hang on a minute, we've got both of them together, have we? Here we go. There we go. And I will also paste the URLs where you can grab them underneath. So I'm just going to leave that up for a couple of seconds. And I've forgotten which one it was. It just remains to me to say thank you for checking out this live stream, and thank you very much to my esteemed guests, Jeff and Simon. Great to hear what you had to say on those topics, and this whole area is one that I'm endlessly fascinated by, so I loved hearing your contributions. Thank you very much for coming and joining us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, and yeah, got a lot out of it. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, likewise. That was a bunch of fun.
Lovely. Awesome. Thank you very much indeed.
Look forward to the next one.